Right, we are back after lunch and we are about to go into our second panel. And once again, we have an absolutely stunning lineup of brilliant women to discuss our next panel, which is all about, remind yourself of the title, Jane, ambition, ageism and authenticity, the 3 A's. I will introduce you to them just one more time. So we have, if you wouldn't mind sticking your hand up when I say your name just so everybody knows who's who. We have Wendy Harmer, who has been on radio for the last 10 years, so you might not recognise her. Dr Virginia Keft. Dr Natasha Ginnivan. Did I get that correct, Natasha? Thank you. Rosemary Kariuki. I hope I got that right too, Rosemary. And Dr Stephanie Dowrick, who you've already heard from once today. And as I said, we'll be talking about ageism, ambition and authenticity, women ageing in the 21st century. So, Wendy, you were a big part of our mornings for many years, and we will be missing your voice on the ABC. I know I will. And I know, but the early morning starts, I understand. There is a point at which one just cannot keep doing that. But it really was good for older women to hear another older woman.
Yes, so it's interesting. At the end of last year, I was doing the the breakfast shift with Robbie Buck. We'd done that for 4 years. And it was our decision to leave because, basically, I think it was flood, bushfire, COVID, flood, bushfire, kind of did us in the end, really. Robbie's coming back, by the way. He's on long service, but I don't know what am I. Am I semi-retired? I don't know. I'm writing the dreaded memoir at the moment. And I was on a comedy panel recently, Jane, and someone sang, "Don't write a memoir, don't write a memoir, don't write a memoir, whatever you do." And I can see the wisdom in that right now. But
I would have hit them if I were you.
But it is very true to say that, there aren't that many not older voices, but older women on radio. Of course, we've got John Laws still motoring along and Alan Jones in his way motoring along. So there's no such impediment for the men on commercial radio. And I did hear once, which I thought was the most fabulous reasoning from a male executive. He said, you've got to remember that when men get older, they lose a sort of a range in their hearing and they can't hear women's voices quite so well.
What, it only happens to them when they're older? I've noticed it earlier than that.
So this was one. And the other old chestnut, of course, is that women don't like to hear other women.
I was told that too.
Yes, that's the chestnut as well. So, what can I say? I don't think, commercial ABC radio has particularly... the wonderful Margaret Throsby has just retired at the age of 80. And, of course, we have Geraldine Doogue is there as well. But in that sort of daily grind, you don't hear as many older women's voices. And certainly not on those talkback stations because you seem to need to be of a particular political persuasion as well. And I think, maybe women would just say, oh, for God's sake, get over it. Stop being ridiculous. Put it away. We've all seen it before. So perhaps you get to a certain age and you run out of patience as well. I'm not sure. It is... what is I found really interesting, and I was just talking about this with you yesterday,
So Wendy and I go everywhere together.
Everywhere together.
Just so you know.
And the Bobbsey twins.
Yeah.
And we were talking about this yesterday at a Women's Weekly lunch. What has been really interesting to me is to have been the first in many, in a few areas, when I started at the Geelong Advertiser, I was the first woman in the newsroom in more than 130 years, like the very first. And then when I started doing stand-up comedy, I was probably pretty much, the first chick to do that, and stand-up comedy. And then, so I've got a few firsts under my belt. But what I have found has happened very, very quickly, that I have gone from being that trailblazer to being part of the establishment in about a blink of an eye, So I think, but I don't think the same has kind of happened to men. It hasn't happened to men in that way. There is still room, I think, for the older men more so than older women.
I think you're right. It's an interesting point you make about going from being the kind of radical, rebellious, pushy young woman to being, okay, boomer, at a certain age where you're suddenly totally dismissed and you think, Christ, I was a troublemaker a minute ago. Now I'm everything that's conventional and establishment. It is a really odd experience. Is that something other people on the panel have experienced too, Stephanie?
Well, I talked this morning about how, say, the drum is a good example, that a range of women into their late 50s and perhaps early 60s are invited. But then when you get into your serious 70s and your extravagant 80s and your naughty 90s, you're only wheeled on as a kind of exhibit, and you're only allowed to talk about old age because that's the only thing you know about. So, there's an incredible waste of invaluable experience over every single aspect of life. And I think it's partly that some of the people making the decisions look at you and think about their mother or their grandmother, and maybe don't hold that person in such high regard for their wisdom. They're used to being taken care of by that person rather than looking up to them. And I think we also have to acknowledge that Australia is an extremely conservative country, and that the centre is far too far to the right.
Here.
Jane, can I just mention something here? I was, some years ago, I was a guest a few times on Q&A, and the bookers on that show said it was often women themselves who felt that they didn't have something to offer on those shows, and they would turn down the bookings, and they were always chasing older women to be on the shows, but it was the women themselves who said, I don't think I can contribute.
I've never said no to them. They haven't asked me for at least 3 years.
Wendy, they don't ask women who have really challenging views. They do not. Older women who have challenging views are very, very seldom asked.
I can see that.
The trouble is, that excuse has been used in corporates for a really long time. We'd love to have more women, we can't find them. What that means is they haven't looked. What about others on the panel before we move on to other questions? Anyone want to add to the why don't we hear older women's voices, see their faces in the media, and does it matter?
Hi, I'm Natasha Ginnivan. I've researched ageing and ageism, and I think part of the issue is that the media has a lot to answer for. I mean, there's such a narrow band of representation of females, literally, I mean, from early adulthood, basically to if you're touching 40 and then beyond, it's just, crickets. Like we hardly have any real representation of all the exemplars of the kinds of people that are in this room. In leadership, there's hardly any females represented in, academic leadership or in politics, as we've discussed. So there is a bit of a twin prejudice. And what happens with that is that, people grow up without any impression, and the absence of the older female gives the impression of insignificance. So that's a major issue that we really need to change in the media.
That's a very, very important point. Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to add on to what you just said there. That I completely agree with that the media does have a lot to answer for. I'm Virginia, by the way. And I think that the kinds of topics that women have to talk about are often part of this problem. So, if coming in with the other comments about the way that challenging attitudes, if women are presenting attitudes or topics or ideas that challenge what the status quo is, then they're less interesting or less, they get less airtime. I think this kind of reminded me, as you were talking about media, when I finished my PhD at uni, one of the local newspapers wanted to do a story on the length of time that I had studied. I did it quite fast and did 4 degrees in 10 years, and did this amazing kind of academic stuff. But the paper, when they interviewed me, their headline was PhD gained, belly danced through her PhD. That was the headline, because I also ran a belly dance school at the time and still do. And but the headline had nothing to do with my academic success. And I think that that there was a much more titillating way to present me. I was a lot younger then, but having that headline, the media really picked up the topic that they thought was going to be more interesting and completely pushed aside the one that would have put me in a position of being a woman leader in academia.
Rosemary.
Yeah. Can you hear?
Yeah.
With the multicultural women, and especially the Africans, I find when they come here, first of all, they struggle to change their education to suit Australian way. So by the time maybe they are needed to go to the media, they are so busy either bringing up children, or their children are older and they are busy working. And that's what I find with our women. They are just working, looking after people who are back home, who are here. And people like me who are out there with the media or whatever, they say, Rosemary, you just like talking. So even ourselves, we bring ourselves down. And also we think it's not my time. And I think we need maybe the women who are there in the media to mentor the upcoming women who are vocal there from the multicultural communities.
I think that's a really important point. I was on a panel at the Canberra Writers' Festival talking to Wendy McCarthy, Jackie Huggins and Virginia Hassiger. And Wendy and Virginia both talked about how their mothers disapproved of them being in the limelight and writing memoirs, and their mothers, and it was a protective instinct, but it was also a sense of you shouldn't draw the spotlight to you, that there's a very traditional attitude about that women are meant to facilitate other people to shine, but not to shine themselves. And clearly I missed that lesson, but it is very powerful and ingrained, and it's one of the reasons I always say to women in rooms where people are asking questions, please ask your question, particularly the women, and don't wait, because you'll miss out and then you'll be pissed off. But it's okay. Listen, there are men in the room, they will ask stupid questions. You won't. That usually works. And you know what? The men generally laugh, and it's usually a woman who says, oh, the poor men. Stop that.
I just
Jane,
wanted to mention, Jane, about being on radio. I was quite open about my age. I'm 67 next week, but I always on radio. I always would be quite happy with saying how old I was, especially working with a younger bloke, because I had to pull rank quite a bit. But it was really interesting that when I started talking about my age on air, and we would get, the text line would roll, you'd get hundreds of texts every morning. Then so many of them started to be about, oh, you old lady, you're old, you old chook, you wouldn't know anything, you've got Alzheimer's, you're past it, why are you still doing, why aren't you retired, blah, blah, blah. So you not only got the gendered comments, but you got the age comments as well, which was a nice little double whammy. Thank you.
Yes, it's fabulous fun. Stephanie.
I just did want to make a point that some of you will be familiar with, that in some worlds and in some cultures, but in some worlds within the world we live in, age is actually an advantage. And I want to say that very strongly, that in spiritual and wisdom circles, for example, age is an advantage for both women and men. And I think we need to take that quite seriously, because what we're talking about is wisdom, ancient wisdom, modern wisdom, wisdom, as opposed to kind of information and, hectic whatever. So the pace is different, and the appreciation of deep thought is also very different. And in those contexts, age is an advantage.
Just to add on that,
Yes, Rosemary.
yeah, in the African concept, when you are over 60, you are an elder, and that's when you're supposed to drink alcohol. Because men are the ones who are allowed to drink alcohol. But for women, you can make decisions now. And I remember when I became 60, one of my friends told me, now you are allowed to say anything. Anything. We shall be coming to send you to go and to attack, to like abuse, abusing is like the things we can't say openly, because you cannot even be taken to the court of elders. But I say, the problem with me, when you send me, when I arrive there, they give me a cup of tea. I will not even remember I was going to abuse that person. But the point here is once you are old, as you say, it's respectable. Because there were no courts, people have the local courts. You are one of them, and they don't look at you as a woman. They look at you now like one of them. So aging is also good. And for me, most people, because I'm surrounded by young people, because my communities, we don't have a lot of old people, but still they are there. But I like hanging out. Like one day I was in the city at 1 a.m. at a 30th birthday with 30-year-olds, and I'm thinking, what am I doing at 1 a.m. in the city? The kids are dancing, and I'm thinking, I'm just looking at them, I'm thinking, I can even be caught by the police, because what am I doing? But it's us who put ourselves in that category, because I had said I'm not going, but they said you have to come. The party cannot be a party without you. So we need to take our positions. It's we women who are aging, we think we are old. Like, for example, I had said, I'll not be coming to the city. It's too far. I'm old now. Then during vivid time, because of COVID, now we wanted to go out. I came during COVID. I saw people on wheelchair, older people, mothers with children, and I just think, hang on, where am I old? And I said, I have cancelled that statement. I'll be coming to the city.
That's good. Good for you, Rosemary. Well, that brings me to something interesting. Natasha, you've been doing research into this area. Because I think sometimes when women hold themselves back, we sort of say to them, oh, you should just not do that, like me just then. But actually, it's harder than that, isn't it? It's actually more insidious than just pull your socks up and get braver. Can you tell us what your research has revealed about how women feel about themselves as they age?
Yes, so I've been really fortunate to be getting funding to research self-perceptions of ageing, cross-cultural ageing, and one of my mentors, who's written a really great book called Breaking the Age Code, Professor Becca Levy, has done a lot of research about the process of stereotype embodiment. And what that's about is, we grow up in a culture that tells us that, after a certain age, women aren't valuable because we're not seeing ourselves reflected through the wider media, or as we heard before, even in books published, we don't see them as much as we hear, males in leadership and media, and so because of that, and because women are sexualized from a very young age, and then all of a sudden you're not sexualized, you're just sort of invisible.
You're
just
sort of the opposite.
Yeah, you sort of go from really present in everyone's mind's eye, and then to the scrap heap, because we tend to treat aging like a binary rather than the life course, as we talked about before. Aging is a process across the life course, but what happens in that sort of mindset or that psyche, which is a very kind of Western thing of binary thinking about age, which is young and then old, is that our own psychology, as we're developing, can sort of start to turn on us, and we embody the stereotype, and our own negative self-perceptions that we've taken in tends to be very deleterious, to the degree that it actually impacts our health and it's the intersectionality of it is worse for people of colour and Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people, people who are marginalised, prison leavers, all sorts of people like that. The stigma is like doubled and tripled and so on. And so all this stigma we take in and we don't realise because, you know, Margaret Mead, I think, made a really great, I think, a cultural kind of observation about culture in that, you know, we're sort of like fish and culture's kind of like the water. We just take it for granted. We don't really realise until it starts to become self-relevant. And that's when we start to realise. But by then it's too late. We need to start understanding ageing as a life course matter. We need to have much more intergenerational, you know, contact, less age segregation. You know, we can really learn a lot from our First Nations people who, you know, revere their elders and have much more multi-generational contact and caring. And I think that's something that we could really, you know, develop and learn from. So, yeah.
Thank you, Virginia. And Natasha, sorry. And Virginia, I want to come to you. I keep doing this. I must be getting old. Saying the person's name that I'm about to speak to instead of the person's name that I'm just saying thank you to. Virginia, earlier, Kathy Eager in the panel before lunch made a really interesting point about the fact that we may mistake anxiety, depression and anger for dementia, particularly in women in aged care. You do a lot of work at the Museum of Contemporary Art where you engage with people with dementia. Would you agree that sometimes we're pathologising someone's actually quite reasonable misery in the face of what their life's like?
Absolutely. I think that's an excellent point, and I think it's got a lot of validity and also kind of harks to what you said earlier about how, you know, the expectation for women to behave in a certain way impacts the way that we live our lives. And being angry is something we're told not to be. So if we're getting older and we're doing, as Rosemary said, we're getting to age 60 and we're telling people what we really think, you know, and pushing those boundaries a little bit more because we say, oh, what the heck, let's just say these things that we were thinking and we couldn't before because we would have got in trouble. You know, there's part of that, but I think that point is really valid. That often these that depression and anger and anxiety and feelings of uselessness and feeling less valid than we used to, and having not the same kinds of mental processes that we had before. We embody those, coming back to what Natasha said too, you know, that really does, we take those things on and they are often misunderstood as symptoms, you know, of dementia when they maybe not. And the work that I'm doing at the MCA, I'm the Art and Dementia Program Coordinator for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander programs. I developed that program over the last 2 years, and that works in the space of creating what I'm calling Bangawara art yarns for older and elder mob. And this particular program presents contemporary art to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples at different stages of their life. And I think this is a really, really important point, that we don't need to wait until it's too late. You know, the processes of dementia can happen quite young. And, you know, the way to feel like we age well is to feel good throughout that life course and to not wait until that point where anxiety and depression has kind of really taken hold. So that program is really holding to that point that you just made.
Yeah, well, it's interesting what you just said then, because I interviewed an incredible woman called Therese who has been diagnosed with early onset dementia. And what she said, the quote just sticks really solidly with me. She said, I used to be a thinking person who had feelings. Now I'm a feeling person who has thoughts. And I thought that was such a reframe of what it was like to live with dementia. And also said something profound about there's always something new that comes with whatever it is you're having to deal with. And she was quite extraordinary. But that also leads into, if you're an emotional person with thoughts, emotions lead you to creativity, to spontaneity, to stopping self-censoring, to all those kinds of things.
And there's a misconception that people who are living with dementia stop feeling. and for some reason, this
It's
is
the
really
opposite, it seems.
Well, yes, but the way that we process feelings changes, and dementia is such a broad range of different symptoms and diseases. It's not just one thing, and it can't be just easily. And I think that's one of the reasons that lots of different symptoms can is it dementia, or just because you're forgetful doesn't mean you have dementia. So there are lots of different ways that that creativity can be a way of aging well, and that's the space that I'm most interested in. And I think that looking to people's place where they are now. So if you're in that process of living with dementia, or you're developing into a kind of life course that's leading to that feeling or that process of living with dementia, finding ways to age well is at the centre of that.
Thank you. Rosemary, you've already spoken a bit about this, but I'd be interested in more of your reflections on how culture shapes the way we look at ageing. Because I think in Western culture, and Stephanie's already referred to this as well, we love to segment people into different discrete groups. We're very, very keen on putting boundaries around things. And so we have very tight assumptions about what it is to be young, what it is to be middle-aged, and what it is to be older. You've already spoken about being out at 1 a.m. in the morning. Now, look, I'm very happy with the 30-year-olds around you, but 1 a.m., oh, for goodness sake, I'm in bed hours before that. But mind you, I was an early bird go-to-bedder when I was 25, so there's no hope for me. What do you think about the way culture shapes the way we look at ageing?
Yeah, culture is something very important. And if I look into our communities, and I'm not talking only of the Africans because I work with the called women, the culture shapes them because everything, you can't do this, you can't do this, you cannot go to the pub, you cannot do, if you are religious, you cannot go to, because we are, especially the Africans, we love dancing. For me, they think I'm crazy because I go dancing in a pub, because where else will you go to dance? So that culture, if I liked dancing when I was home, and I come here, because of my age and because my children, the community wants me to be in this box, that's how the dementia starts. Because you are depressed, you are isolated, then you start becoming, they start saying you are crazy, but it's because you're isolated. I've seen so many women, their children bring them here to look after their children. They don't take them, they don't even allow them even to go, even to walk by themselves. I have a program called Culture Exchange Program, where I take women to the rural areas, and all women from different cultural backgrounds, different ages. The last one, which was 2 weeks ago, I took women to Maji. Most of them were aged women. And you can say, they were saying, I have never gone anywhere. I have not done this. I have not done this. Because when their children brings them here, they just want them to look after the children. They don't think they have feelings. They don't think, and then they're scared. Now it's like the reverse. You know how the mothers used to tell the children, now the children are telling the mothers. So that cultural has really damaged. And I've seen the cultural people getting dementia very early. And remember, our communities, we are social butterflies. We have so many things back home. You visit each other, baby showers or whatever. Yeah, even when they go to the baby showers, you are old, they leave you back home. And you are old, you are 50. So can you imagine a 50-year-old? By the time you are 80, you became what you are because of what the children and the community did. The other children who are good, they go with you everywhere. The others look at them, the kids, why are you bringing your parents here? So we need even the ones who are born here. Let us start getting programs to take to them, to divert to them. When we go to those culture exchange, we went to Maji, we have gone to Maitland, we have gone to Griffith. We live with host families. And whether that woman is 80 and another one is 20, I'm telling you, they behave the same. You can see, because we dance a lot. Everyone is dancing.
You need to talk to Pauline.
You will do dancing. So that cultural, we need to help people to come out of where those boxes which they have been put, and bring them and join other women. So that cultural shock and that cultural belief, which is not there, it's
Yes.
Yes.
You're being used as a kind of servant.
Exactly, yes.
It's so interesting you talk about that, because as you were talking, I was thinking of something I've always thought, and that is that one of the fundamental differences between what it feels like to be a woman and what I observe of what it feels like to be a man is that women still, I think, feel they need to earn their right to exist, whereas men just feel they have a right to exist. Stephanie, how do we break down this idea that it's not enough just to be ourselves? And not enough just to be ourselves. That women are always striving. This Women's Weekly lunch that Wendy and I were at yesterday, it was all about young women who were putting together these amazing programs, and they were very impressive. But I've started to feel a bit sorry for them, because the pressure on these young women, talking about ambition, they kept using the word inspirational. Nothing is more devastating than being called inspirational, because there is no room to be an ordinary human being.
Well, that I think I've spent my whole life trying to answer this question, and I alluded to some of it in this talk that I gave this morning, and I quoted an amazing poem from Mary Oliver, where she was contemplating death. She did, in fact, die in 2019, where she said she wants to live as a bride married to amazement, as a bridegroom welcoming life into her arms. Now, the hugely unfortunate thing about most Western culture is that we're invited to be a very small part of ourselves. So I used the word wholeness a number of times this morning, and I'm going to use it again. We need to change the way that we think about our whole self in order that we can think about our whole selves. We have never been more interdependent with one another than we are now, not only because of the numbers of people on our planet, but because of the risk at which we're putting our planet. Yeah? So we actually need to understand that we are interdependent with one another, and we are interdependent with our planet. The minute we begin to see that we are part of a tremendous whole, we begin to heal the sort of fractures in ourselves, the splitting in ourselves, the binary thinking in ourselves that tells us this part of ourself is worthy and that part of ourself is unworthy and to be shamed about. So often in all sorts of situations where I've been working with people in workshops or spiritual groups, so I ask people to remember significant moments in their life, whether they were glorious moments or difficult moments. And often, or almost always actually, it's a mixture of those things. It's the moments that you would have done anything to avoid, and it's the moments that you just could hardly believe your luck. And from each of those moments, each of those sort of pivotal, sort of landmark moments that have created who you are today, you will have gained some insight, some compassion, ideally some self-compassion that brings you more intensely into our human family. But while we're splitting ourselves, and while we're splitting society into good, bad, evil, saved, not saved, and all this craziness, we are living in a wounded state. And very, very urgently, just as much as we need to do something about climate change and the planet, we need to do something about the way that we think about ourselves and other people.
Could I just add on to that, Stephanie, because that really does speak very closely to my perspective as a First Nations Aboriginal woman, and that idea that country is all that we can and cannot see. It is all of the things that we do. It is the things that we see. It's the ground we walk on. It's the trees. It's the air. All of the things are intertwined, and we can't separate those things. Even to the point where language and culture and family, some of the things that the other panelists were saying about, the ways that different cultural groups see family units as part of the self. It's not just, me, it's my aunts, it's my uncles, it's my cousins, it's my, grandkids. Those ways of thinking about family are incredibly different in First Nations context to the way that they are in some Western contexts. And because of that, there is sometimes more support with those communities, because that the things that we're talking about here, the good, the bad, the up, the down, the things that we like, the things that we don't like, they can be shared and understood as a whole concept and not in this split way.
Thank you for that.
Jane, I
Yeah.
wonder if we might use your expertise here and touch on the topic. We were talking about media before. We talk about the way that older women are portrayed in advertising.
Are they anymore?
I just wanted to, I'd like to get on this because it's an interesting one. A few years ago, I was running an online women's magazine called The Hoopla, which you may or may not remember. And it was designed for an older age group. And Jane Waterhouse and Jane started it with me from Bauer Media. We started this together, and Jane is an absolute whiz, in advertising and media. And we would go along and we would pitch for advertising to these advertising companies. And Jane had all the stats there about the value of the older women's market. For instance, the bulk of cars that are bought by women over 50. The biggest, most resilient market in advertising is women's travel over 60.
Oh, yeah.
And so we would go along and we would pitch to these advertising companies to a group of 25 and 30-year-olds, and they just looked at us like we were from outer space. It was incredible. I mean, we couldn't even win the Twinings frickin'. It went to Mamma Mia for the 20-year-olds, It was just remarkable. So I just wonder if that's another bottleneck that we can talk about.
And it's all intertwined,
Yeah.
coin of phrase, with the fact that we have ageism in the way we employ people. So because we constantly think that anyone over 45 is past it, all the people making decisions about where money is spent are young people, and all of them are labouring, sadly, under the same false illusion that I had, that people were born old and therefore they will never get old. And it comes as a hell of a shock, it certainly did to me, that that's bullshit.
Just talk us through that in a little more detail. What do you mean by that?
Well, I can vividly remember actually being on a beach and watching an older lady doing something, and I was young, and I sort of realised, I knew intellectually it wasn't true, but I just thought that I would always be young and that she had always been old. And it took me, the weird thing is, and it is to do with advertising, that I realised I was wrong when I turned 26, because I worked in advertising and they divide the demographics up as 18 to 25 is the young audience. And when I turned 26, I thought, shit, I'm in the all housewives.
Yeah.
How the fuck did that happen? And I realised it was going to keep happening. But we're going to go to questions from the floor in just a minute, but I wanted to ask all of you just a couple of final questions. I will start with you and move along to Stephanie at the end. How do you personally want to age? What do you think might stop you from ageing the way you want to? And where would you like to be when you're 95?
Excellent question. That's a great question.
Yumi wrote it.
Yeah. Look, I think the number one thing that I want as I age is choice. I want my choices. I want to be able to make choices. I don't want anybody to be telling me I can't do it if I want to. And I think that's actually probably my biggest fear about aging, is I look around and I think, oh, nobody is taking that choice away from me. I want to be in control of the choice. The choices need to be mine. That's probably my biggest thing, I think. But as I get older and heading towards the 90s, I think I want creativity. I want to feel healthy. I'm not going to spend my life doing things I think I should do, but doing the things that I want to do.
Well said. Rosemary.
I also want to be in control of my life. I don't want to be put in this archive, in this box. If today I want to sleep on my bed looking that way instead of this way, I do that. If today I want to go, let's say, to whichever country I want, I go. If I want to, if whatever fashion will be there at that time, that's what I want. It makes me happy. So I want to be a butterfly the way I am. And how do I want to be when I'm in 95? Dancing. I love dancing.
My mother is 91.
I love dancing.
and she dances at every family party.
Yeah. And on this coming Saturday on 15th, 450 women are dancing in Liverpool Catholic Club. And maybe half of them are over 50. Because that's the only place they can go and dance without people. You know how nowadays they dance with the hands like this. There you dance orderly because you're all looking after each other. So I would like everybody, and when you dance, your heart is dancing. So the whole week, the whole month, you'll be dancing. So if we can have the councils open, small drop-in for everyone who wants to drop in and dance, even if it is for half an hour, while they are walking, they open those spaces, dancing spaces. And because we're in media, can you just promote that?
Sure.
Dancing corners. So that even
I'll
if
put
we
it on
come
the
here, there's
list.
a corner, people go and the way we did an exercise here, 2 minutes. It's good for you. Yeah. That's how I want to be 95. I'll still be strong and kicking.
I bet you will. Wendy.
Oh, I don't like to tempt the fates to make any plans like that. I'll just take it as it comes, I think. I mean, I didn't make a birth plan, and no, I didn't. I had a choice back then, but I didn't make a birth plan, and then I ended up having an emergency Caesar, which I never would have thought of. Therefore, really reinforcing the fact that if I'd made a plan, it would have been thwarted anyway. So I tend to be a little bit more leave it to the fates, I think. The one good thing here for me, I think, has been really fantastic, has been having my kids sort of later in life. And so I have 20-year-olds, even though I'm in my 60s. And I always do counsel younger women when I meet them, to have their kids now, because menopausal women and adolescent kids were never meant to share a house. And, I was always told, older mums, they're so great. There's, they're older and they're wiser and they have more patience, which is just bullshit, really. But what we do have is more money to pay younger women to look after our kids.
Yeah.
So I think that's worked out.
Yeah.
I would like a couple of grandchildren, please, and then I'll just take it from there. Thank you.
Lovely.
I think that, like you, I'd probably leave it to fate, I guess. But as I get into older ages of life, I'd like to be with the people I love and have choice, like many of us. Also, I'd like to continue that journey. I mean, aside from my research, I've also, done a lot of this sort of like inner work along the way. And so to be able to transform some of those, earlier experiences in my youth that probably weren't optimal, like bad relationships and things, transform some of those experiences to, help others in their aging journey, I suppose. But also in approaching my 90s, I'd love the idea that my then younger kids could be aging in a world where they wouldn't be shamed for aging or ashamed of aging. So, I think the work that we're doing here is maybe leading the way that way. So I think that's where I'd like to see it go.
Thank you. Stephanie.
I loved hearing all of those, and those are really good questions for each of you to take home, aren't they? Because we are making small choices that lead to a bigger decision that we can't quite see. So, like most people, I would hope that as I continue to age, as I'm already aged, as I continue to age, that I don't have to deal with much more pain. We haven't talked about pain today, but many of us live with daily pain. And that's a big consideration in how we use our energy and how we feel about the value and the quality of our lives. We could do a whole workshop on pain, and I think it would be very useful. And I'm talking about physical pain, but also emotional pain, because we've spoken very, very briefly about a death, but we are also, everybody in this room, I imagine, has experienced grief with the loss of other people who are very dear to them. So I think that as I grow towards 95, which is a little bit hard for me to imagine, but that would be delightful. I would have the bliss of having seen all my children, including my little Lux Loana, having grown up. But I would also hope that I'm able to increase my sense of pleasure in life. Those of us who are political activists sometimes leave joy, beauty, pleasure, delight, awe, wonder somewhat aside. And when I'm giving a retreat, we pay a lot of attention to that. And sometimes in between, I forget. So I'm trying to make that more of a priority because it feeds the soul. And it is also, as we age, the soul that needs feeding.
Thank you, Stephanie. We now have time for questions from you to our wonderful wise panellists. And we have a lady with a green jumper on who has shot her hand up. It is. Where are the rest of you, I'd like to know?
Yes, I've learned to get my hand. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I believe that every panelist today, we could spend an entire day with each of them and we wouldn't even start to plumb the depths of their knowledge. You've been wonderful. But I particularly have picked up on what Stephanie has said because she was reminding us about climate. And I've been a climate activist for a number of years. And thrilled as I am to be putting my mind to all the things that as an older person I need to focus on, we are facing such a horrendous future. How many people in the room here are part of Grandparents for Climate Action now? Really? Good heavens.
I think you're being recruited.
I'm not part of Grandparents. I've no children of my own, but I'm terrified for my grandnieces and nephews and the lives they're going to lead. It's just your comment around what a conservative country we are, even though we talk about ourselves as being, the can-do and individualist. If we don't pull together, we're going to sink. We really are. We're going to sink. And the only political commentator I've heard in the last few years, I'm learning from a book by a guy called Tim Hollow, who has put out a book called Living Democracy. And the truth of the matter is, if we could absorb and live that book, he calls it a manifesto for, how does he name it? Basically, the world we live in is coming to an end, and we've contributed to that in our ignorance in the beginning and in our learned indifference in the last 20 years or so. But the thing about it is we can do something about it. And I beg you to get a little bit more involved so that we have something to pass on to the next couple of generations.
Thank you. Right, lady up the back first, had her hand up quickly, and then the lady in red at the front.
Can you hear me? Yep.
Yes.
Yep. Thanks. Look, I just want some strategies for dealing with younger people. What you said, Wendy, about menopausal women with teenage children, but, you know, my two have hit 22 and 25. The kids in the supermarket don't move to the left. The pedalers down the, riding down the bikes don't,
The shared cycleway.
Yeah, shared cycleways don't step aside, Occasionally, you get incredibly polite people and, they just offer you a seniors discount without asking. So, but it is, I'm really having it, and I suppose it's because my two are 22 and 25, but they're just downright rude.
I think this was actually, wasn't this same question asked by, written on a wall in graffiti in ancient Rome? I think you are talking about a perennial and lifelong and difficult part of the human condition. Yeah.
I'm running out of strategies. In COVID, when we were only allowed to picnic around, I actually just started taking a walking stick out so they couldn't knock me over and I could hold it 90 centimetres apart from the side, to get them around. But I am finding that and I know I'm one of the younger seniors in the room, but I am starting to find that invisibility can be really, really patronising and insensitive. And I would like it to figure out how to stop it.
It's also even more, when you talk about that, you're absolutely right, but it's more insidious than that. I'm thinking about my elderly parents who are both fit and healthy but 90 and 91 and both on sticks. They are limiting where they go because they are afraid of the cyclists who go as if they're the sperm in chase of the egg. If you've ever seen those helmets, it's what they look like.
Of course, Jane, it's about accessibility. If you make, a city accessible for people with a disability, well, you make it accessible for everyone.
Everybody, that's
so
right.
It's
so
very
inaccessibility for people with a disability is inaccessibility for all of us as we get older. Stephanie, you want to say
mums and
something?
kids.
Yeah. Oh, yes, with the pram. God, yes.
I'd like to just make a remark, though, that some of the resentment that young people feel about older people is highly justified because the interests of old people have been, we're of a section of old people have been so vigorously protected by the conservative governments that we've had for the regressive governments that we've had for the last 9 years. And the 2019 election was a horrible example of that, where Bill Shorten tried so hard to reduce some of the privileges of a wealthy cohort of aged people. And the protest was enormous, so enormous that he lost the election. And the opportunity for greater wealth equality in our country was absolutely lost. So, we might feel hurt that boomers are called this or that, but some of the boomers have defended the indefensible in terms of lack of equity for younger people. So that doesn't quite go to your question, but I think there is legitimate resentment, particularly in the global cities, where people who are doing jobs of social value, not working in the finance industries, but jobs of social value, which have required, a high level of commitment and education and so on, cannot afford to live within cooey of their workplace. And this is a ridiculous, abhorrent situation that has been cultivated in a calculated way by successive conservative governments.
Yeah. We've got time for one more question.
Can I just make a comment, please?
Yes?
Can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you. I was just considering whether I'd let you make a comment. Yes, go ahead.
Well, I'm 94.
I just
I've
found
been
out
in-
what I want to be doing when I'm 95. I want to be that lady there asking a question.
I've been in the Older Women's Network since 1994, and I want you all to know that this is a wonderful organisation to deal with all the things you have been discussing today, which you should develop and develop and develop. And I also want to comment that older people I'm sorry, I had a stroke last year, so I'm muttering a little bit. The country over the road. No, much further than that.
China, USA.
No, starting with A. You can't help me, can you?
America, Asia, China.
Anyways, what they call old people there, once you reach a certain age, they class you as a national treasure.
Japan.
So the attitude is not one of disabling and demoting people who are older. It's one of saying you're wonderful people. And I believe that the Aboriginal people here have much the same attitude, that they regard older people as being treasured and looked after and not disregarded, as so many of us have been. But I just want to say that I congratulate our group for running this show today, and I hope that a lot of you will belong to this group and do a lot of the things that you've been talking about all day and don't just disregard it.
Thank you. A lovely comment. And I think that brings us to a close for this session a minute early. I'd just like some congratulations for that. Because this panel could go on a lot longer. There are some amazing women here saying extraordinary, wise and profound things. But we've also had some fun and some humour as well, which I think is
Hey,
incredibly
Jane,
important.
do we have time for one more?
Well, I'm not making the rules. Yumi, do we have time for one more? Very quickly.
Thank you. I can only do one thing a day. I'm medically retired, and so my pace is, I can only focus in one thing a day. I have no wriggle room. So I want to ask each of you, either if you are at that stage where you're at, or you will become that, what will you, what is your strategy? I discovered Stand Up for Mental Health, finding the funny in my funk, and also this theatre group, which has become my home. What will be your strategy when you don't have any wriggle room?
I've thought about this quite a bit, and there are so many books that I want to read, and there's so many topics on which I'd like to go a lot deeper. And so I think that, I think just to learn more about the world and more about who we are and the great thinkers of the world and the great philosophies. So that'll be my thing, I think. I just want to go a bit deeper into things.
What I'll do is associating myself with positive people and joining the group like this one. Whatever you are, join something. And because you are doing something every day, so even if you don't have an answer, somebody in that group have an answer. So associating yourself with different positive people and also not leaving the other ones down.
Yes. Go on. I don't know why I can't remember.
Is that me?
Your name.
Virginia?
Virginia.
Yeah, I was just going to say creativity and art is so important. And I think that it's one of the things that, for some of us who have never thought of ourselves as artists or creatives, and I know there are lots of people think, oh, I can't draw, I can't paint, I can't do anything creative. Well, you can, because what other people think of it isn't the point. It's what creativity and making can give you. And this can be as simple as looking at shadows and thinking about how they fall, or picking up something and scratching on a mark on a leaf, or picking up something from outside, or looking at the way that things move and, getting some tin foil and scrunching it and listening to it. These are the things that can be still creative. They are around you all the time. Everywhere is art. And I think that if you can find a little bit of creative spirit in your day, it does make you feel something. And every single one of us can have that.
Natasha.
I think my wiggle room will probably be to continue my I write a blog called Mobilising Wisdom, and it's about trying to encompass and reframe our ageing journey, incorporating wisdom from different philosophies, different cultures, my own experience, but also from other countries and other cultures and other spiritual traditions, whether it's, Eastern or, mystical, trawling, that sort of thing. And that'll probably continue my journey to wholeness. Yep.
Stephanie.
I think one of the things with wriggle room, as you're calling it, is how are we receiving? How are we receiving? And sometimes when we look at that a little bit more deeply, we realize that we're somehow blocking out what might nourish us and welcoming in what somehow limits us or frustrates us. And once we recognize that, it's the old consciousness raising thing. Once we recognize what we're doing on a fairly automatic basis, we have much more choice. So I think that just thinking about what you're receiving and what you're making yourself available to in a very, very simple way, I think that can be, disproportionately helpful and loving and self-caring. Because one of the things we need to receive is, of course, self-compassion and self-care.
And I'm going to add my own little bit to that, if I may. I'm just going to try to get even more myself. More and more myself. Also, there is still a lot of wine left to be drunk. We've come to the end of this fabulous session. Please give a round of applause for Stephanie Dowrick, for Natasha, for Wendy, for Rosemary, and for Virginia. What's wrong with me? Thank you all so much.